this video today. I know that the work has been a little confusing without having some instructions, and that is entirely my bad. Miss McKinley had to run to the doctor's office this morning. Everything is totally fine. No worries about that. It was just one of those weird things. But I did not adequately set you guys up for success, and that is on me. So I am here to record a slightly late instructional video. And again, I apologize for setting you up not quite for success this morning. If you've already done all of your work and tried to the best of your ability, unless you really feel strongly about it, don't worry about going back and doing it the way that I'm about to ask you to do it. I'll be very lenient when I'm grading for today. Mostly I just want to see that you tried. But if you have not started working on it yet, or you've been confused and been waiting for a response from me, then I would love to talk to you about bework, because I think it really does help you with a powerful, powerful skill that when we talk about preparing people for college, this is so much of what college was for me. A lot of homework was outlining chapters, and when you're assigned that much reading, and a lot of it is very detail-oriented or it has these kind of complex ideas, just reading it doesn't quite stick in your brain the same way as if you outline it. So let's look at these directions. Create a thorough outline of the introduction to the textbook on disability studies. Each new topic should be on the outer level, 1, 2, or 3, and supporting evidence and arguments can fall into the inner level, A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3, if sub-arguments divide into even smaller sub-arguments. It's a little confusing, but we'll look at what that means in just a second. And then I give my spiel on why I think outlining is useful. I really do. It's hard at first, but have patience. We'll figure it out together. It might take a little longer than some assignments, but I think it's meaningful. And I think this is a really cool chapter, so I hope you get something out of it. All right, so first, let's actually look at this article. I think it would be good to sort of read through the whole thing first. It might be a little confusing, but we'll use our outlining process to understand it a little more deeply. But what we have first is this paragraph that is about disability being an enigma. That means something that's like difficult to understand, right? And it talks about how people have both felt compelled to stare at the disabled, but also want to look away. And then we get two examples of that, right? We have Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who's considered this incredible president, despite, or like, not even despite, he just like is an incredible president who had polio, but he felt the need to hide that. So we see this like tension there, right? That he's so greatly respected, but also he had to hide this thing about him, despite the fact that like he was clearly just as capable as anyone else. He had polio the whole time, but he felt the need to hide it. Then we also have another of these examples of the weird tensions that people have when they react to disability. With the Hebrew Bible, it has the lesson that you shall not curse the deaf nor put a stumbling block before the blind. So that's about the idea that you should not have prejudice against people who are disabled. But then also, if you do not carefully follow his commands and decrees, the Lord will afflict you with madness, blindness, and confusion of the mind. So that shows that like we should fear disability as a great punishment. So what I did, I've created an outline below. And this outline only goes through the first maybe like 2 or 3 paragraphs. But we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. So this section is my outline of the first paragraph. So I put the main idea that like unites everything together at the top. Disability is a concept that inspires contradictory reactions in people. And then they give 2 supports for that claim, right? They give the support of FDR, they give the support of the Hebrew Bible. And then I put under that, for FDR, I give 2 points. Each one is one of the contradictory points. So 1, seen as a great leader, but 2, had to hide his disability so he didn't seem weak. And for the Hebrew Bible, 1, There's a claim that you should not curse the disabled, which implies sympathy. And two, there is the threat to punish people by making them disabled. So what you see there is just me breaking down this information into the way that best organizes it for me. You may have a different method of organizing something. What we're going to notice here is that this point is not just one paragraph. This point is one paragraph, but I thought that two paragraphs actually fit pretty neatly together. This one on disability as a freak show and disability as a medical model. And so I just made them one point. I had one person ask, so do we just outline each paragraph? And the answer is, if that makes most sense to you, yes. But I think a lot of times multiple paragraphs can be put under one point if those paragraphs are all about the same thing, if that makes sense. And we'll talk about that more in just a second. But so again, to carry on with my example, I thought that these two paragraphs were kind of about the history of disability, right? The transition from disability being seen as something that was freakish to something that deserved sympathy and was an actual medical issue, right? And so I made my header for this section, brief history of views on disability, and then point A, disability is freak show, point B, medical model. And then I put two little things under this. For freak show, it's meant to be gawked at. It includes like the physically disabled, the deformed, even just people who aren't white, right? So we're seeing that like there's a lot of ways that disability has been defined, and often the only thing it means is that you are not a normal white person, whatever that means, right? So we're seeing already in the construction of what we mean by disability, it's not as clear cut as we might think it is. There's a lot that goes into it, and a lot of not so great things. So this goes back to our umbrella question, right? Like, what do things like plague and illness and disability reveal about the world we live in? I think this section right here about disability as a freak show, that reveals a whole lot about us that we certainly still see today to some extent. Okay, then we get to the medical model. I put 2 points under that. People deserve medical treatment, cannot purely be treated as freaks, but this also leads to some pity. Pity, which leads to dehumanization. It's like, I think the author's argument here is that, if you're just looking at someone and thinking like, oh, poor them, that person may be perfectly happy with their life, as a deaf person or in a wheelchair. The fact that we look at those people with pity shows that we're not thinking about the ways in which, like, that person is a whole human with a whole brain that I know nothing about. Instead, we're kind of like projecting our own thoughts and insecurities about disability onto them, right? I know this is really complex, but just like to explain my thought process. Okay, so at this point, that's when I stopped. So I stopped here. And what I will actually do to help y'all out is I'll make this line. Is it going to work for me? There we go. And it'll work on that slowly. But now put a start your outline here. And again, apologies for not including this previously. That's my bad. Okay, so you will be outlining all of this, like this page and this little paragraph right here. So one tip that I will give you as you start working on this, if you notice, we're about to start talking about the movie Million Dollar Baby, right? And all these paragraphs all the way down to here are still talking about Million Dollar Baby, right? So maybe what we could do is our next major point could be, we'll hit enter. And then if you just keep hitting enter, it will scroll you back out into these different points. I know that outlining can be a little frustrating in terms of like, how do I make the 3 show up? But let me show you that one more time. So if you hit enter, the C will show up, but if you keep hitting enter, it will move you backwards. So enter, enter, enter. Okay, so maybe our next step could be $1 Million Baby shows us many different sides of disability. Then you could have a point for like the plot of the movie. You could have a point for the history of protests around the movie. And then you could have one about like, what does $1 Million Baby say about how we look at disability? You could go any direction that you want to, but that would take like 4 or 5 paragraphs and collapse it down into just one big 3, right? All of it fits under $1 Million Baby. You could also, again, go paragraph by paragraph, but that probably means that you're going to wind up like mentioning $1 Million Baby by name more times than you might want to. And again, the goal with outlining is to make the most simplified version of a complex thing that you can, because then you show that you've really mastered that material. You know exactly what's going on with it, right? Okay, so I am going to let y'all do this. Make me a big, beautiful outline. I'm so excited to see them. Again, this is kind of like, this is college stuff. So I know it's hard, and I know that this is advanced material, but I think it's really, really interesting and important to think about, because, you know, we've talked a little bit about the virus and the ways in which the virus reveals some inequalities about our world, but there are so, so very many inequalities about our world, and thinking about disability, I think, is a huge one, especially because, we think of ourselves, or I know I have previously thought of myself as someone who is like, I'm just a normal person. I am an able-bodied normal person. But the thing about disability is that like, it's not a clean category. It's not like there's disabled people and non-disabled people. At some point, you're probably going to get sick. At some point, you might break a bone. At some point, you might start dealing with some kind of a mental health issue. Maybe it'll come, maybe it'll go, maybe things will get better, maybe things won't. But regardless, one day, hopefully, you live to become older, and a lot of older people live with various physical disabilities. This line moves back and forth, and so we want to set up a world that makes room for all of the versions of ourselves, not just like healthy, able-bodied versions of ourselves, right? So just interesting stuff to think about, and I hope you also think it's interesting. And then finally, this part's the easier part. When you are done, when you've thought about all this stuff, you can go back to the discussion section that is in Canvas, and you will write a paragraph. Your paragraph will address like one disability that you're familiar with. It could look any kind of different way. I have a bunch of explanations here of what I could mean by disability. And then finally, write about how this chapter helps illustrate how people and individuals with this disability, how people think about individuals with this disability, and how you would like the needs presented by that disability to be regarded and provided for. So this chapter has a lot of information about how people look at folks with disabilities. You can think about like, okay, so I know about this disability, and yeah, this chapter seems really dead on about that. Or you could say, I actually think that's wrong about this thing. I think people look at, this person in my life, or me, or whoever. I think they look at them very differently. And then finally, disabilities tend to present certain needs because the world is set up for certain kinds of people. And if you are not that kind of person, then you're going to not have the world that's set up for you. So you need something, right? How would you like for those needs to be looked upon and provided for? Do you want them to be looked upon pityingly? Do you want them to be provided for in a way that's very difficult to the person dealing with that, who's living with that disability? Or do you think it should be different? And if you think it should be different, how? Okay. And I thought I was over here sending you off into battle without giving you this lecture and all of this information. Foolish, foolish, Miss McKinley. I apologize again for that. So hopefully it will make more sense this time. I'm going to send you guys back off into the world to write outlines and then write some reflections on disability. I really look forward to reading them and looking at them. It's a tough skill, but it's a meaningful one. Okay, thank you guys.